What's going on, everyone? So as you start to join here, make sure to drop in company, your role at the company. We'll try to make this as targeted as possible. We'll probably end up doing a lot of Q&A here, I'm sure. Erin Wells says she's so thrilled for this. Well, Erin, we're thrilled that you're here. So everyone, drop here in the chat, company, role, and we'll try to make sure this is as tailored as possible. Chris, Joe, really appreciate you guys joining me today to talk about the future of work, how we're thinking about scaling post-COVID. And really, it's not just post-COVID. I think COVID just accelerated where we were kind of heading, holistically. But I think the good kind of future of work is that I think people are more comfortable. We've seen that, oh my God, we can actually trust people to work remote. Like, oh my, maybe we didn't need to have our thumb on them, 24/7 to be productive. So for this conversation, I've got a list of questions teed up, and I'm going to kind of walk through some of those with you all. Again, everyone, if you want to start to drop your questions in the Q&A, I'm super, super excited for this conversation, with the two of you guys. So if you two, I guess, yeah, why don't you guys, do you want to do like a quick, what's up? If you don't know, if you don't know, you don't know, but like maybe Chris, do you want to do a quick high level on what you're up to? Joe, you as well too, just in case people didn't check it out.
Yeah, for sure. My name's Chris Walker. I'm the CEO of Refine Labs. I started this company about 15 months ago, and we architect demand generation programs predominantly for growth stage software as a service companies.
Joe Mullings, Chairman and CEO of the Mullings Group Companies. Primarily started my career 30 years ago as a headhunter, and subsequently since then have blown out a consulting firm that does attention awareness models, and I selfishly steal stuff from Chris all week long. And also we have a pretty well developed production company that builds brand attention awareness for our clients in the medtech life sciences business.
Love it. All right, well, that's good. If you don't know, make sure, and maybe team Becca or somebody, let's drop both their links to LinkedIn in the chat too, so people can follow along. Both these guys are putting out amazing content around marketing, around talent. Hopefully, eventually, I'll get Joe to steal some of my content as well too. That'll be a goal that I'll look for.
I can't steal from Vayner alumni. Come on, dude.
So I'm gonna make sure we post this out on LinkedIn too. So we'll make sure we'll get that cranking too. So cool. So all right, guys. So we're gonna talk a little about on-demand talent. We're gonna talk about hiring. And I think maybe what I'll do to kick this off is maybe let's go a little broader. One of the questions that I've got kind of this list of questions that you all had sent over that we gathered from other folks as well too. Joe, I'm going to start with this. That you put up a post. Actually, I'll drop the link to the post. That the average full-time tenure is at 4 years and declining, and that the average contract/interim tenure is 2 years and climbing, right? So right. You've got full-time tenure declining.
Yep.
You've got contract tenure climbing.
Yep.
Why do you think this is? And Chris, I'm going to ask you the same part of it. I'll give my 2 cents, but why do you think that this is? Why do you think more companies are looking at it this way?
So let's make sure that the cohort of the full-time is 60%, 65% of the workforce. The contract interim is 35%. So the largest sampling of the market of 160 million employed in the U.S. is dropping from 4 years down to 3 years. And so, that data point sloping down, it's still a largest part of the workforce. Going up to 35% is quickly escalating. And it's interesting, and we'll dig into it after, the age groups matter in there. So what's even more interesting is if you're above 40 years old, you've been at your 45 years old, you've been at your job for 10 years. If you're below 28 years old, you switch jobs every 3 years. So the median retention at the 45 plus is 3 times higher than the 25-year-old. So you've got to examine that data. And so that tells me that the workforce coming in, full-time and interim contract, is switching jobs a lot quicker. Why? First of all, I think technology is rapidly accelerating. You cannot count on a college degree carrying you technically through, because the rate of acceleration of technology is so rapid in regards to acceleration in relative terms. And you're starting to get specialists be hired into highly technical environments, Jake. So you've got to turn that over really quick. And those individuals continue to index up, making more money and getting more challenge. So that's why you have that sort of conversion and eventually sort of differentiation of rates of growth.
Chris, what about you, man? I posted that link, everyone, too. So I posted a link to that that video, Joe, in the comments, cool, in the chat. So if you go check that out, Joe put together a great video around it too.
Yeah, so Joe set the stage at a macro level, and I'll kind of speak on a micro level. So for me, and so for me, a couple years ago, I recognized that I had a skill that very, very few people have. And I realized that I didn't need to be a full-time employee in order to deliver all of the value of the skill that I have. And so I started working with 5 companies at once instead of 1. And then over time, more came, and I hired people underneath me. And it's essentially on-demand talent. You get people that are validated, that run our process, that I've already vetted, that do things the right way and know what they're talking about, so you don't have to make a hiring mistake. Another interesting thing is that executives for certain specialty roles don't know how to judge whether or not the person is good at their job. They might talk well, they might present well, but when you actually get into the details, as you get into a higher level, most people are not able to judge whether or not someone's good. And so at a micro, it made a lot more sense for me to work for 5 companies at once instead of 1 and make more money and have more flexibility and all these different things. And we're going to see that continue to repeat for a lot of people that recognize that they have a unique skill that doesn't require a 40-hour per week job in order to deliver it.
Yep. Let me jump on that because we're going to just riff back and forth. The dynamic here is super important for everybody watching this. If you look at change always occurs at the fringes. Right? The collective is really the beef where everything is. That right now is the 45 to 65-year-old. As I mentioned, statistics show they stay in those jobs on average 10 years plus at that age group. But as you move outside that collective, that fringe is what Chris just referred to. That fringe is eventually going to be what is going to start to become the collective, the norm. And so right now, with the rapid acceleration of technology and business models changing, and if we look at Refined Labs' model, and Jake, yours too, you guys are disruptors, and actually, as I put the term, dislocators. You've revealed a new way to do business. Disruption is still within a category. You guys have both introduced categories of new ways to do marketing, not disruptive bullshit that is like, oh, it's kind of cool, it's kind of different, so that's a new category, a totally dislocation. That dislocation happens in the fringe. First, we all know people laugh at it, people question it. The collective can't get their head wrapped around it, eventually realize they have to do it, don't know how to interview the person for an FTE, a full-time employment. They come in, they pay the hired gun who can come in and do what takes 5 other people, right? And that collective mindset is, again, I'm going to let Chris talk about demand gen versus sales gen. He's the master of that, right? But instead of hiring 7 salespeople to send over the hill and maybe 1 comes back with something of value, that demand gen mentality on the fringe is really going to eventually become the collective 5 years from now when you play this tape back.
Yeah, and I'll talk to the sales side of this, and actually something that you said, Joe, in the first answer is technology is evolving. So in pre-2015, we had like 100 sales tools. We have over 1,500 now. So I want you to think about your internal talent. You have a sales operations person who's been there for 3 years using 4 tools. That person then leaves, right? How can you possibly, as an FTE, and Chris is probably the same for your roles, it is impossible unless you are on top of your game, vetting, not doing your day job. Sales operations and RevOps to me have become a utility reports organization versus a performance organization. And sales, whereas marketing and sales kind of trends always follow marketing, right? Marketing went through the big technology explosion. Now sales It's sales organizations are not run like performance organizations. Nobody is in there tweaking the outbound process weekly or monthly, like you, or even bi-weekly or monthly. They're kind of letting it go. The sales process, we have a 28-day sales cycle. Well, which part of that do we need to optimize? That's not what RevOps and sales ops are doing. They're generating reports. They're telling you that, yeah, we have a bottleneck here, but they're not doing anything about it. And I feel like
it's all retrospective too. It's all retrospective. It's not prospective. And so sales ops in most organizations today are retrospective on their data.
Yeah.
And with long sales cycles, it takes a long time to catch up.
And then by the time they can respond to the retrospective signal they received back there, it's entirely too late and somebody else stepped in.
And that's it. And I'll give you this tale. So Trip Actions had to lay off, obviously, a lot of people when this happened. But what they did with their team that they had, they got in a room over the weekend, like literally end of March. They rewrote 60 sequences. So they were then uploaded by Monday. And guys, that should be called every week. But we don't have that mindset. And that's where, again, it goes into this, performance organization and, a lot of the work that we're doing around, outbound and sales process optimization is, it's not a knock on anybody in these roles. It's that the roles are changing. And again, there's forward looking, there's new technology that it's so difficult to stay in front of. And sales in particular, when you talk about that bubble, the vernacular has always been in sales. You have to hire full time because they're the only people that will care about your business. Well, why is tenure plummeting in VPs of sales? Why is this tenure continue to happen? And I think a lot of it is we just continue to ask people in these operations and support roles to do too much to where they can't be performance, based. And so for us, like, that's why we've shifted a big chunk of our business there to really do two things: sales operations, enablement and staff augmentation on demand, and VP or sales leader as a service. My goal, Joe, is that, in the future, instead your SAP, you've got 30 open manager roles. Instead of giving this new manager 20, why not bring in someone for 2 days a week?
Yep.
And we've got to change this mentality in sales that outside people can't support us other than trainings, which is kind of the go-to. And that's really what we're trying to do with our business, is try to change that mindset that let us as experts come in, augment your team where there can't be specialists in everything. So then the team can move faster. And it's relevant to that stage of growth.
Yeah, and quite honestly, tip of the spear always, and I don't know if it was you or was Chris who brought it up, is marketing really well done. All it does is result in sales. And in my organization, we do marketing really well, and sales basically are order takers. Now, if you look at the old school playbook of most sales organizations, they will tell you, oh, I need to know the customer. Oh, I know what beer he drinks or she drinks. That is no longer valid. That dance no longer should be the tip of the spear in what you're doing. Marketing really well done is well beyond the playbook of 99% of the corporations out there. They just don't know how to do that appropriately. And I do believe that you will still, Jake, have sales facilitators inside the corporate organizations, but their compensation will drop dramatically. And I do believe organizations like Skaled, organizations like Refine, will end up justifiably demanding more money, because on an evidence-based outcome, and this is not an advertisement for either of you guys, on an evidence-based outcome, we will be able to show metrics because of the playbooks we know that work, because I do it as well in the TA world, talent access world, that I am just going to be paid for results, and let the organization own the people who take the orders.
I love that. Chris, I've got one for you here. So I think we've kind of walked through some high levels on like where our thoughts are at, how we've positioned our businesses and how we think about it. When you think about the benefits of this, right? And I think we've talked about this, about being performance-based is a big benefit. When you bring in more on-demand or you bring in more part-time, there's a performance element. What are some of the other benefits? And again, what are some of the other reasons why, as an organization, they might not have the expertise, right? We've covered that. What are some of the other reasons that if I'm a CEO, a VP of sales, we've got a lot of VPs of marketing, a lot of different various folks in here, and even people we've got some frontline folks in here probably like listening, like, man, I'd like to just do one thing and not do that other stuff. But for the organization, let's start there. Like, what are some of those extended benefits, outside of just, maybe somebody who has more expertise in my internal team?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple that I see that are very clear. The first one is, if something happened, you wouldn't have to lay somebody off. Like, organizations like mine expect things like that to happen. And so it comes in the P&L in a different way than direct overhead. The next one that I think is that the quality of the people that you're getting, you're not going to find typically in a full-time employee for obvious reasons. And the third one that I think is super interesting and often overlooked is that when you bring this person in, the skills transfer by osmosis to your team.
That's right.
And so I think those are three really obvious ones to use, whether it's for an extended period of time or for a short period of time. That really depends on what the organization is trying to accomplish. But I do see whether it's changing the mindset, the cadence of work, the metrics that are measured, over time, you can almost change the way that function or overall organization operates.
Yeah, so let me jump on that too. So I'm going to put some metrics on top of what Chris just shared. It falls on the balance sheet differently. That's to the tune of about 25% for an FTE. You're talking about PTO, you're talking about benefits, you're talking about optics to the street if you're a publicly traded company. You're talking about severance and charges that we watch have just happened on the back end of COVID to these organizations. That's just the economic side. Every CFO is right now is just like salivating over listening to 25% off the balance sheet on exposure there. And then in the regards is how many of us, and I've done it a lot after 30 years and dealing with the C-suite a lot, the skills inside of a corporate organization by design are all compromised. The specialists never rise to the top. They're usually 1 to 2 tiers down if they can throw a dart on a very specific skill set. At the rate of acceleration of technology right now, on just the intaking of information, whether it's on social platforms, whether it's on direct-to-consumer, B2B, all of those different methodologies, you cannot be an expert in-house on all that. You should be able to shuttle in and shuttle out without fear of losing your job. The best VP of commercial or sales marketing should be fearless and nothing more than a ringleader of having all these specialists come in and out of the organization and not be worried about his or her job in the eyes of the CEO. That is exactly why you need to bring in these specialists time after time in order to crack the very rapidly accelerating market and optics of the consumer.
Yeah, and to be agile and respond, right?
That's right.
And sometimes you don't need that role forever.
Don't. Give me that $400,000 a year person for 1 day a week and let it only run me $75,000 for the year. And then that person can do that in 6 other companies. Everybody wins on that. The contractor wins and the person using her services wins.
Yeah, and what do you? And then so we're obviously talking about this, and I gave like my take on it, and I know especially in the venture capital world around sales, just there's like this mindset, and well, it's not just the VC world, but it's definitely more predominant there about the team all has to be full time. So what do you feel like are the misconceptions? We're talking about saving money on the balance sheet, bringing in experts, staying at the forefront, transferring knowledge, skills, reducing bottom line costs. What do you feel has been the blocker? What do you guys feel like?
It's ignorance. It's ignorance.
Yeah.
So I go through this every week with my VCs. 70% of my business are venture capital backed. Venture capital have what in mind? A liquidity event. If their burn, in my world, an average burns around 1.5 million a month. If I can accelerate your liquidity event by 6 months at 1.5 million per month, that's $9 million. And I can bring in murderer's row for you on specific skill sets. Forget about whether they're FTEs. And then I can get you to your exit quicker because I'm bringing in snipers in that area. You've got to get over the fact that you're 55 years old and used to dudes sitting in a cubicle farm. And I can show you evidence-based a path to exit quicker and probably driving higher valuations because I'm getting you to, right? First to market wins the first raise. Second to market sometimes does better, history shows. But I can have you exit quicker and reduce your burn. that right there should be a conversation you'd be open to rather than going to the 1985 Sand Hill playbook from a VC perspective.
I think one pushback that I see a lot, not like in my own conversations, but as I observe, is that oftentimes the people that you bring in may not be aligned to your business objectives. They're aligned to their own profit. And I think it's created a misconception in the market, especially over the past 10 or 15 years, of people going to find that talent and it not being good. And so I think that the key to this being successful is that the organization you're working with is aligned on your business goals, not just a specific little piece.
Chris, bullseye. Jake, think about this. Most organizations want the person in the office 24/7, 365. So now you've reduced your sample size to those who are available, those that live within 45 minutes that can commute.
Yep.
And then those that potentially have a good enough skill set to get hired. Compound that over your 5 top hires. You can't win a championship with that methodology.
Look, I was hiring for a role at my company, which would be similar to what a director of demand gen at a SaaS company, that's who I was hiring for. And I was looking at people that were commanding close to $200,000 a year salaries that came from reputable brands in the VC world. And when you actually got into the details, didn't know what they were talking about. And so I think that's exposure to the companies that have these types of employees that are getting very large salaries. And when you actually get into the details, they may not know well enough. They're mimicking what they've heard from other places. And they're conforming to what's happening in the overall world, which may not actually be the right way. Like I very much appreciate and like going against the grain and being early to things.
Well, I think, what a lot of people, again, it's just like, I think to Joe's point, people are just so uncomfortable anchoring off of, even if it's not working, and eventually it happens, but eventually there just comes a point where the argument becomes too much, and companies that do this are going to start to outcompete. And so maybe the question becomes, what about the flip side, right? What if we think about, and so maybe I'll try to summarize from listening to you two talk, and please, add in the color here. For me, it's the performance roles, the roles that where technology is rapidly innovating these roles, or the way that business is done. Like you said, Joe, around like the business model around marketing or sales. Those to me feel like the no-brainers. Like there's no way that it's someone who's been internal at a company for 4 years, they're just not getting the at-bats that someone who's not. That person gets 4 at-bats with 4 different techs. This other, people have had 200 at-bats with the same one of those techs and 200 with the other ones, right? So there's these performance optimization parts of the organization, sales, marketing, win full time. So let's flip this. So I think those pieces to me feel like the no-brainer parts. But what are the roles that you think are the most important full time? Joe, you talked about maybe a shift of some of these full-time roles to being more of these like caretakers of these types of individuals. But
orchestrator,
yeah. So how do you think about the full time? Where is it most critical then to have that person? Where is it most critical to have those FTEs, in sales, marketing, other parts of the company?
Look, that comes down to the responsibility of the people who architect the company and live by the credo of, best wins. And so to me, every single one of my VPs of each of the functional roles should be full-time. Having said that, the board, as well as the CEO, need to ensure that they've hired for security in allowing an ecosystem to have a permeable skill set coming in and out of the organization as an organism. Like VP of sales, I don't care if the woman you bring in for the next 6 weeks blows you out of the water on a demand gen mindset or a back-end software development or a CRM system or whatever it is. Don't sweat it. I'm not going to have love at first sight. I'm married to you as long as you facilitate that. So functionally, every leader in the organization, in my opinion, of their functional role, again, supply chain, whatever your model, those should be perm They should be hired, though, knowing that they are used to that permeable sort of skill set in and out of the org. So that would be my answer on the short. From there, you can certainly iterate that further down. But the CEO sets the culture. Permeability is the mindset. You're safe across the board. Because here's what happens. Listen, I've sat in so many C-suites from Google down to the most for least likely medical device, life science thing ever to make it to market. And the organizations that win create safety in leadership, that I'm not going to fall in love with a rock star coming in and out. And I'm going to hire you that you have that agility and mindset to always try and upskill my organization.
What if we flipped it and looked at it like, just a thought that's going in my head, it's not fully formed, but about whether or not you're touching the customer. Like, is that a variable that indicates whether or not you should be full-time or not? It's an interesting debate. So that one's interesting. I love the point that Jake made, which is that for things that are rapidly evolving, like, I think that is the key where you need to bring someone in to stay up to date. The things that I've learned over the past 15 months working with 15 companies at once is incredibly different than what I learned at one organization doing it myself. And so I think when you need to drive that significant change, especially when you need to do it fast, I think that's where the skill becomes most important. It's like, look, you can make the 30 mistakes that I made 3 years ago, or you could work with someone that can just get you there as fast as possible.
Yeah. And I think to just kind of like marrying these two and maybe even answering your question, look, from an overflow standpoint, look, and so we are like, I'll give you a good example. You talk about touching the customer. So we are, Outreach, which is one of the like fastest growing tech companies, just raised another 50 million. We are their largest implementation partner. We do their implementations. They hand them to us. We crush it. I've got a team that handles those, and we're the #1 rated partner. Everyone's happy, 0 churn. So I think there are fringes, right? I think you can, and again, and Joe hit it on the head. It's about, you can hire 40 full-time people or 25 and flex to what's right, or you can hire. I just feel like we've got to get over this mindset that people can't give a shit about your company. People aren't invested in performance. People aren't invested in success just because they're not full-time. And I feel like it's that to me is and again, I love the way that Joe, you laid that out, and then how Chris, you iterated that. You got to, you have to have people that have that mindset, that understand, look, this is the goal we're trying to accomplish. And just by doing that same hiring forecast, we've all seen it, that you have this hiring forecast for sales teams and it looks like this, and they have X hit quota. It's never right. And that's why I see most startups, that we had a startup in Austin, it implode yesterday, called Scale Factor, that like basically shred. And this is like this rapid growth unicorn. And I guarantee the reason was they continued to hire based on forecast versus actuals. And I see this all the time. So, why not control the 100+ people you had to let go and get it to here, sustainable, flex, and you can have the same results. And they're all results based too, like so I feel like the arguments are there. It's just more and more companies getting comfortable with it. And so we've got some questions that are starting to come in here, guys. So I'm going to start to jump into some of these. Joe, this is for you. You talked about sales operations, rev ops looking, and this is, I think marketing ops is the same. It's looking proactive or prospective versus reactive. What does that mean to you? Like, what does it mean? Like, how do you get an organization, even your internal people, to not just look at historicals, but also, be proactive?
Yeah, so look, there's retrospective data, and you've got to pay homage to retrospective data, because what retrospective data does is allows you to build up a case so you're less wrong about the future, right? Right. I can't predict the future, but I can certainly increase my odds of being less wrong about it. Having said that, most organizations from the revenue perspective tend to look at retrospective data and use that past view market on what future facing market is. And also, retrospective data is based upon retrospective tactics. Tactics are changing all the time. And so when you look at a demand gen mentality, to me, demand gen is, I spend my time informing, instructing, and giving future facing And then based upon that, if I do marketing well done, I have inbound coming in because of that. Like our business is more than 80% inbound. In the headhunting business, that's unheard of. And I'm not talking about inbound on repeat customers. I'm talking about new business, 80% inbound. And so what we do then is we change our hiring profile from a customer to a customer service facilitation mindset. And that's a lower cost point if you're a pure sales organization than trying to go out and hire the rock stars, right, who wine and dine and also cost you the most money. So that would be my answer to that. Retrospective data has value, less wrong about the future. Prospective, though, is I want to drive a demand gen mentality and then make sure I have a team in place and a bench that I can hire my sales facilitators in order to handle that inbound business.
And I think you've got to be willing to play. You talked about the safety. You have to let people, and this is rampant in marketing and sales in general. It's candidly the number one reason for churn is that we're not giving people the ability to say, look, not 100% of our tactics have to be focused on this month and next month and this quarter.
If you hire correctly, Jake. So I know guys who I call jazz hands guys, right? They'll play that. You got to give me enough time, but it's jazz hands
of course.
because they're playing an old game playbook, and the time is really just runway for them to eventually look for another job. But if you take a very disciplined demand gen mentality, and you're working with somebody who it's their first blush at it, that's going to be a hard battle, and you're going to have to fight that good fight. But that demand gen is going to require a runway, and then based on the business that you're doing, you got to look at the long-term value of that customer and some of that demand gen. So you got to be really careful on your demand gen. You can't do a demand gen mentality if you're selling T-shirts, right? But on the flip side of that, if my average sales $44,000, my demand gen investment will be very, very high on some of my channels, but I have to look at the LTV of that customer over the next 3 years on that spend. And Chris could probably dig into that super deep. That's his area of expertise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of go in a different direction here, but one of the things that I was thinking back to about it was 3 or 4 years ago when I worked inside of a company. I built a demand gen engine for them, and the VP of marketing came to me one day and was like, "We're going to hire this creative partner for us," and I was resistant to it. I was like, I have everything. It's all under control. Things are going good.
Yep.
Like we don't need this. And then I went and worked with them, and we paid them quite a bit of money, and it was one of the best things I ever did. And so if you just think about that, like it took me a long time to recognize that external help actually just makes internal employees look better, but it feels competitive to many people.
Very, very, and again, nobody, especially the top, wants to look incompetent or shown up. And that's where, to Joe's point from before, I think that's where a lot of this comes in. And so one of the questions we have here from Aaron, I think dovetails into this. So if you're in the front lines, and I'm going to actually ask 2 questions that are somewhat related, but somewhat not. If you're on the front lines, or like, let's say you're a manager, director level, you're hearing us talk, you're like, yeah, wow, bringing in outside help sounds kind of great. Like we could use support around this thing. My team is overwhelmed or they don't have the expertise. How would you go about first gaining support? So that's like the first part. And if you're a full-time employee now listening to this, you know what, actually, I'm going to come back to that. That's going to be, as I'm processing it, that's going to be a longer question. So let's start there. If you are front to midline, you're not at the top to where you have that ability to do that, how would you think about trying to impact your organization with some of the things that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, so a couple things that I would do is I would look for examples of companies that are doing the things that you want to do. So if you're a sales organization and you think that doing the things that Outreach and Gong are doing very well on LinkedIn right now organically would be smart, I would start to look closely to what they're doing, and it might be a driver to why they're being successful, and use that as an example. I think that executives love to see an example of what good looks like. I think that's one thing. Another thing that I would consider is that if you're able to find the right partner, the partner should be able to help you demonstrate why they need to do it for the organization, whether it's through an initial analysis of, okay, these are the things that are happening, and I've looked at 20 other companies, and this is what it should be looking like, and there's this gap, and we're going to close the gap, and here's what you can go and communicate to executives. I think that a lot of companies are able to do that for you.
Yeah,
Joe?
gosh, this is such a tough one. This is where we go from fringe to collective. What Chris just explained was spot on. Here's the challenge: is be careful when you buy the headlines versus how those headlines occurred. And so I would absolutely look for the ability to emulate what I perceive to be, because look, you can look at any model on the front end, but you need to get behind and look at the machine. Most of the time when you're looking at rev gen and increasing it and changing the way you're doing it, most people only look for a change in rev gen when they're not doing well, right? So even if you're sending 8,000 people over the hill and you're making your numbers, you're not going to change it. So typically people, when they're looking for change, are doing that when something is clearly at risk. And then that's the worst time to make a decision, because it's a pure emotional play and it tends to be a desperate play. So if you are going to look at analogs to your business, and make sure when you're looking at analogs, you're looking at the proper analog to your business. Because you can look at an analog in a business and it has no bones at all, but you're just in love with the fact that that's how it appears. So interview people who are pulling that off for somebody else, because there always is. And in today's world, there's always an architect behind what's happening that is not part of the organization. It's a consulting firm, because we are in that chaotic transition right now. And when I use the word chaos, don't get caught up with chaos as a bad thing. Chaos is where all opportunity lies. And so what you want to do is look for analogs to your business, who's doing it right, interview the firm, and then once you interview the firm, ask them how they would architect the game book back into an organization that this is totally a brand new concept for. Because you can bring in the best firm, but you're going to have people inside your organization that on purpose, in order to pay their Mercedes-Benz payment and their kids' private school, are going to throw a wrench in there. So it's a very, very dynamic environment. So you want to make sure you have people who can not only give you the game book, but also have the ability to show adoption and utilization on the back lines, which what you're going to need.
I love that. And so I think if I could summarize, so Aaron, if you're on the front lines, what you want to do is go out and find the right companies, to Joe's point and to Chris's point, and you want to understand what they're doing, and then bringing that back to your business is saying, hey, are these outcomes that we want to drive for? Here are the people that did it. I think doing a little bit of homework and bringing that back to leadership and aligning to what leadership goals are is probably going to be the best way to be able to make that happen. So here's a good one from Glenn. And maybe we'll get a little, I don't know, prophecy here. Like, what are the hard trends, fact-based, and soft trends may happen but do not have to happen, you see in the next 1 to 3 years? What additional disruptors do you see where there'll be greater opportunities for the demand gen folks?
Chris, take us out on that, Chris. That's your sweet spot.
So I don't have any hard facts prepared, so I'll just talk about the
that's all right.
The things that I'm seeing. I've predicted this in my head since 2016 and publicly earlier this year, is that over time, and Joe mentioned it too, I think that people that are really good at architecting demand programs will make more money than the best sales rep. I think that will happen. The reason being is that the way that people buy things has changed, and a majority of the buying process happens pre-sales touch, at least for companies that are running a predominantly inbound or demand model. And so that's one thing that I see as an opportunity. The second piece is that there's this very large shift that's happening that has actually taken a long time in my view. But if you look at it in like the micro, it hasn't been that long, where in B2B from 2012 to 2020, everything has completely changed, but most executives at the top haven't realized it yet. And so there's a huge opportunity for companies that recognize it and proactively move, rather than reactively saying our revenue's down and then having to fix it later when it's too late. Like, the interesting thing that I think about is that we're seeing this all happen already in B2C. We saw it with bookstores and taxis and those types of things. And it's only a matter of time until it starts coming into B2B. But I think that the interesting thing is in the B2C world, what was disrupted mainly was the distribution, not needing to go through, sell your soap through Walmart in order to get it to the consumer. And the thing that I see as a disruptive point, to be direct, is that the distribution in B2B is the salesperson. So we're seeing higher ACV products being sold self-serve, no touch. We're seeing less outbound sales generation overall, and more coming inbound. And I think that's just the way that buyers are shifting. Will salespeople go away? Absolutely not. There's definitely a core role. I think that the key change that will happen with a sales rep is they will become more of an expert in their customer's business than the flashy person that takes people out to dinner.
Yeah, so I'm going to start there and work backwards. So I'm with Chris on that 100%, is the sales function will never go away. The profile that you hire will. As I always call it, the white-toothed, shiny pants salesman is already dead. They just haven't figured out where to bury him yet. So that's going to go away. That's going to be an entirely different profile. I don't believe there's anything B2B. Everything is P2P, person to person. You know, I tell my people that all the time. It is a soul that makes the decision. It's never an organization. And when you can think about how you can connect with that soul and then give them evidence-based argument to make the decision, you're going to win. So as you create your content, think about that. We buy emotionally, justify logically. And it's always one person who makes the decision that then champions that all the way through. So it's not a B2B business, it's a P2P business, person to person. We talked about the permeable mindset. Jake, I think the most disrespected, underestimated differential over the next 3 years is upskilling in every single business model across the world. Is we have just moved into, forced upon us, and to me, very Darwinian in nature, we have just moved into the most massive upskill demand of all time. Salespeople. In my business, and you can just, I want you to imagine this in your business. I'm in the healthcare industry, in the medical device industry. So pharmaceutical reps who have to go into doctors, sales reps who have to go into ORs, cath labs, ICUs, emergency rooms. They cannot walk through that door anymore. All my competitive advantages have been leveled. You can do that in the food business. You can do that in hospitality. You can do that in the car business. The sales engagement landscape has changed. The organizations that start to upskill their sales tip of the spear are going to absolutely crush the organizations that are just going to try and pour more power up against that granite wall that is not going to change moving forward. So whether it's Zoom, whether it's virtual, whether it's how you surround your potential customer, that upskilling is going to be the #1 core competency in every business over the next 5 years. And those that don't jump on that early are absolutely going to be dinosaured.
Yeah, and I love that you took it there, because that goes into, and I'll kind of challenge, this is for everyone who's in here now. It's on you to upskill yourself too. That you've got to, the #1 reason I would say for being proactive is, and I learned this early in my career, you're gonna have an organization that you should find organizations that are gonna invest in you, but you have to invest in yourself too. And for me, when I think about trends, it's, if you're in sales development and that's a trend, you need to become the master of sales loft and outreach. You need to know those tools better than anyone. Like, if you don't understand what's possible with technology right now, that is where I feel like we're really, the upskilling needs to happen, Joe, is that what's happening right now is we're actually continuing to almost want lower IQ from our sales org and just more button pushing. And what that equals, my friends, is training a machine on how to just push the basic buttons. And so, my kind of thought around demand gen is over the next 1 to 3 years, what it means to be an SDR. And I think this plays into both what Chris, you and Joe said, is going to just radically change. I think you're going to have less people, and if we want to go crazier, I think what the original, like, hopefully the future we'll get to is you're just going to have specialists. There's people that are amazing at cold calls, copywriters, and optimizers. That's an SDR team. Do you know the amount of people that are really good at being amazing on the phone, amazing copywriters, and data analysts? Yeah, there's like a big fat zero, right? So I think we've got to just, to your point, we've got to reimagine these roles. They're literally doing the exact same thing they did when Aaron Ross invented this role back in 2005. And that's before all this technology came out. And so for me, I feel like we have to change the whole way we look at it. And Chris, you're probably hearing this. Sounds a lot like a marketing organization, right? You've got with like a call component. And that's kind of my point. Like, guys, copywriting and optimizing copy, that's marketing automation. If you guys don't know what that is, like that's more like, and so therefore, if you're not learning the P2P skills, you're not understanding how to have a conversation, and you're at a company that's not giving you that opportunity, you're learning skills that are going to be obsolete or certainly be condensed as technology starts to take over parts of that. And I feel like if you're not at an organization, to Joe's point, go find one. If not, we're telling you that there's going to be these changes in demand gen. You're seeing the results from your team. I think like Bridge Group or someone released a report about the number of SDR teams that are hitting quota. It's like less than 50%. And there's a reason for this. And so if I'm sitting in a sales seat, and I'm sitting in a sales development seat, I'm thinking about what is the tech that's going to change the future? What is the tech that I need to learn to manipulate so then I can spend less time in and more time in P2P? And I feel like that is the issue that I see with this upskilling that's not happening. If anything, Joe, what I see consistently, sales organizations aren't even being trained the basics of sales, like around how to engage with people. Like I feel like all these sales fundamentals about human nature and how to phrase questions and how to drive momentum. I look at all these onboarding from big companies to medium companies, and I'm telling you, it's just starting to get so less focused on that. So I think you've got to up your EQ and your tech skills, which are kind of two binary, or just go deep on one. That you either have your EQ is off the chart and you're going to make $500,000 a year because you're a hired gun who can go sell for 3 companies, right? And you're like, boom, I'm just going to like crank this thing. Or I'm the person that does this, like Chris said, and I'm optimizing this whole thing. The middle is where, again, to Chris's point, buyers are getting down the journey. G2 is at its infancy, right? At its very, very beginning stages, Trust Radius, all these sites. As buyers get access to more information, we start to ungate more content. Chris and I saw you post about this. I've been posting about this for almost 2 years. I hate gated content. It's friction. Guys, that's the 2010 HubSpot playbook. And so there's a whole bunch of these changes that need to happen around, EQ up-leveling in particular. If you're going to be in sales, you need to be up-leveling your EQ and or the tech side. But that's it. Other than that, again, if you're about the wine and dine, et cetera, I think you're learning skills that are going to be obsolete.
Yeah, you mentioned, EQ's a really appropriate term thrown around a lot. There's something that happens between IQ, which to me IQ is very, very important. Cognitive intelligence can't be beat as long as it's tied into conscientiousness. And then you have EQ. But in the middle of that is AQ, and that's the world we're in right now. And I interview for AQ, which is adversity quotient. We are in the middle of a major transition right now in the world in regards to social interaction, which, don't make a mistake, that's business interaction. And I am always looking for somebody who has an incredibly high AQ, because in order to manage that, EQ is once you're in the moment. IQ is what you were blessed with and a little bit of what you learned. But that adversity quotient in the middle there is what's allowing you to transition in between both of those. Once you get those worked in, you've got that force multiplier. You mentioned it earlier. Somebody who's a great writer, somebody who's great with customer. I'm looking for force multipliers in those very specific boxes that in aggregate become amazing teams on the marketing, or I call it commercial side. I became Chief Vision Officer of Management Recruiters International, and I immediately got rid of sales. I immediately got rid of marketing. And we're a commercial organism that needs to work all together. And so, that AQ mentality, as we move into this transition of, that sales mentality into a marketing mentality, there are going to be people that are just going to burn out, their heads are going to explode, or they're going to retire, thank God. But and then there's the young snowflakes, and I don't mean that the wrong way, and I'll take the heat on that because it's true. But there's those people in between that will make that transition that you can build legacy and $1 million salaries around.
And it's really interesting because we've been focusing the conversation on sales and marketing. However, the exact same things are happening in product, in supply chain, in people and culture, all over the organization. This is happening in different ways, right? It's a overall shift in how business is happening, not just on the commercial side.
Yeah. And I think the interesting part is, and I feel like, Chris, those other groups are moving faster. I feel like they're more apt. You think about a finance org, right? They're bringing in an audit, bookkeeping, like they've been, a lot of these other orgs, it's been more how you do it. You bring in outside
legal,
experts.
Right.
Legal is a perfect example, right? You're not carrying all these lawyers like head count. You've got experts in different disciplines. So, all right, we're going to wrap up.
Hold on, before we go on that, you're going to wrap up.
Go for it.
So because sales has always been driven by subjective evaluation, marketing, supply chain, engineering, manufacturing are all around objective data. And now we are moving into an environment in revenue that should also be objective data. And so forever it's been the charisma BS that has gotten in the way. And again, on the commercial side, everything happens gradually until it happens suddenly. And there are going to be a lot of people caught when the music stops in the next 24 months, causes COVID as the accelerator. That is going to be super interesting to watch.
Yeah, I got one question for both of you, actually. I've been thinking about, we talk about the fringe. Like, what is the timeline of this? What are the sequence of events of this taking more form of scale, do you think?
Well, I think the first group that will get reformed probably is RevOps and SalesOps. I think that to me just feels like we've moved so far away from what it was supposed to be to being that I think if you're looking for lift in your revenue, and by the way, Chris, the same goes for marketing ops. It's kind of like that family of what we call operations across revenue, that I feel like moving those organizations to as Joe, performance-based organizations. That the job isn't to do the stuff behind and create reports and dashboards. It's sales and marketing performance optimization. I think marketing's already kind of ahead of that, but I don't think sales ops and revs ops, they're good at generating the spreadsheets, but not actually driving action into the sales org, because there's a lack. And this goes back to what Joe talked about. This is the old school. They don't know sales. They've got those numbers over there. Like they don't no, actually you should be adapting your sales cycle monthly. Why wouldn't you be? Why wouldn't you be adapting the talk tracks that you're using based on throughput from stage 2 to stage 3? So I think, to me, that's my vote, is that I think RevOps and sales, RevOps and sales ops become action performance organizations, not spreadsheets.
Yeah, COVID is the meteor in our life, as it was to the dinosaur. And I think you're right. RevOps, sales ops, marketing ops, and then it's going to swing around really quick, Chris, and it's going to kill the executive suite because they're all going to be exposed. And then you're going to get the new mindset in there of what both you gentlemen have been talking about since I've known you.
Nailed it, man. You literally nailed it. I mean, that's exactly right. And that's how we see this playing out. Like, for us as an organization, we're just kind of waiting. Like, when people would ask us about, hey, what happens to the economy? I'm like, well, in like 18 months, our business will be in a much different place. We'll shift project to more retainer-based staff aug. And I can tell you the work that we've done with growth stage startups, where we come in and, we're doing the part-time sales leader, work, it's embedded, like it's embedded. They feel like it's a part, same work you're doing, Chris and Joe, the people you bring in. So guys, I appreciate you. This is fun.
It's fun.
It's fun to get together. Joe, it's been a minute. Chris, it's good. It's always good. As usual, Joe, you always make me realize how much we've got to step up our audio visual game. I was texting the team. I'm like, God, the move home. We moved houses. I used to have this real nice setup. We bought a new house. So I'm like, shit, Chris, we got to step our game up here. We got to get to that Joe level.
This is my house.
I know, but you've got it set up. You've got it. You got the art in the background. I'm like, damn, I love it. Well, look, guys, I appreciate you. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.